Welcome to the Jubilation Station special on the Renaissance and Reformation.
It's the Renaissance of Europe, a revival of art. 14th century Italy is where it got its start. New ideas, new wealth, it's changing society. The Catholic Church has too much power, people have to body. Martin Luther takes a stand with the 95 Theses. Nailed it to Wittenberg, the Catholics it displeases. A reformation of the Church is soon to take its stride. Western Christianity turns to take the mic. Lutheran, Anglican, Protestant Reform, Anabaptist Calvinism swept in like a storm. The Northern Renaissance is worth a mention too. England, France, and Germany had their own breakthroughs. Gutenberg brought printing to the Euro population. People now have books, they have literary salvation. Von Eyck, Vermeer, Chloe, Worth. Northern painting has its own rebirth. The Renaissance paved the path ahead. The Dark Ages were long, long dead.
Niccolò Machiavelli formulated the idea that most people are selfish, fickle, and corrupt, and the world is a wicked one. He also said that it is much safer to be feared than loved, which turned out to be a very controversial statement that many disagreed with. Johann Gutenberg was a German printer who invented the movable type mechanical printing press. He revolutionized communication with his invention. Francis Bacon was another Renaissance thinker who was employed as a statesman and writer. He came up with the idea of empiricism, or experimenting, after he found out the crazy theories that medieval scholars came up with to answer many societal questions. Galileo Galilei was yet another controversial Renaissance thinker. He was an Italian scientist who proved Aristotle's theory regarding the matter of the stars and moon wrong. This theory angered different churches because it went against their teachings. The printing press had dramatic effects on European civilization. Its immediate effect was that it spread information quickly and accurately. This helped create a more literate public. Utopia is an ideal or perfect place. There is no war, greed, or government corruption. The mentality of the Renaissance was secular. People focused on what was happening in their life on Earth as opposed to worrying about the afterlife. Vernacular is the dialect of a certain region. It started to become much more common during the Renaissance, and it allowed the books that authors were writing to be understood by more people.
Now for a commercial break.
Today we are making an apple tansy, and to test it, the queen herself. There are only 6 ingredients: eggs, cream, nutmeg, apples, butter, and powdered sugar. First, you beat the yolks and the egg whites together. Then, beat in 1 cup of cream. Get all that beautiful cream in there. Add nutmeg for taste. I'm gonna add a little bit more. And finally, 6 shredded apples. Next, you melt butter and fry apple mixture until firm. Turn over and fry until cooked. Add slices of fried apples on top. And sprinkle with powdered sugar. Bon appetit! Thank you, and see you next time.
And we're back.
Renaissance men were educated men that excelled in many fields. They were able to dance, sing, play music, write poetry, and be skilled riders, wrestlers, and sword fighters. Renaissance women were expected to understand classical writing and art, but were not allowed to create anything. These women were highly educated, but they had little influence in politics. Concepts from the Renaissance are visible in the art, books, poems, and museums of today. The time period was important because it allowed many changes in European art and culture. This era also resulted in many innovations in science and anatomy.
We'll be back in 3 minutes, 15 seconds, and 22 milliseconds.
Using 1/3 of a potato, 1 carrot, and 1/5 of an onion, today on Renaissance Cooking we will be making the average soup of a Renaissance family. This recipe requires little to no seasoning and no extra fun proteins because we couldn't afford any of those because we are quite poor. You will be chopping up all your ingredients into a rough chop. Careful to not waste any ingredients because we can't afford any extras and we have to eat everything that we have. Next, you're going to add 1 tablespoon of butter to a saucepan and melt on high heat. Once the butter is completely melted, add your potatoes, carrots, and onions that you previously chopped. Sauté this on medium-high heat until the onions become translucent. It's bread time. Today we'll be making hardtack, which is just any amount of flour with any amount of water. You're going to mix it until it looks completely inedible, but once it does, that's when you know you're doing something right. You're going to take this mixture once it's done and just put it on a baking sheet. You don't need parchment paper, you don't need cooking oil because these were not available to peasants back in the day. Flatten this mixture out to the best of your ability and make sure you get everything from the bowl because you're too poor to waste. Check your potatoes for doneness. Next, for no reason in particular, you're going to add 1 egg to the soup. Make sure you mix it until the egg whites are cooked because you don't want to add salmonella to the list of diseases your kids are already exposed to. You're going to mix this until the egg is cooked and then add a splash of milk into the soup to give it more thickness. Then check it to see if your bread is done, and if it is not, keep on cooking the soup. Now it is done. Now that the bread is ready, you're going to take it out of the oven and using all of your strength available after working long hours in a factory, you're going to try and pry it off the baking sheet. This may take a couple tries and a couple minutes, but eventually you can get it. Enjoy!
Welcome back.
Reformation is the action of reforming a practice. The Reformation started because people wanted reform of the Roman Catholic Church after all of the abuse happened. Johann Tetzel was a Dominican friar who preached on the concept of indulgences. Catholics believed that his teachings abused the sacrament of penance, so they got angry. This feud caused Martin Luther to speak up. Martin Luther began as a devoted Christian, but soon expressed his religious beliefs and led the entire Protestant Reformation for the faith, now known as Lutheranism. John Calvin was influenced greatly by Martin Luther as a young child, and as he grew up, he became a published author after writing a book on his interpretations of Luther's 95 Theses. He soon gained a following, and Calvinism was born. Henry VII was the King of England when the Renaissance and Reformation took place. Though he was a devout Catholic, his faith was soon tested when he needed a son. The abuse included the selling of indulgences, which suggested that wealthy people could buy their way into heaven, which was disputed many times by many other Christian religions. In response to Johann Tetzel's selling of indulgences, Martin Luther decided to take a public stand and write the 95 Theses. Luther stated that the Pope has no power over purgatory, and buying indulgences gives people a false sense of security, which endangers their salvation. Soon after Luther did this, someone copied the 95 Theses using a printer, and Luther quickly became known all over Germany as a rebel. Lutherans believed in interpreting the Bible themselves rather than believing in someone else's interpretation. Ministers led the congregations and the services, and they focused on preaching and rituals. They believed that salvation came by faith alone. Calvinism is a sect of Christianity created by John Calvin. Each church is governed by a council of elders with worship focused on preaching. Followers believe they should interpret the Bible to their own understandings. Anglicans were led by the English monarch who was the head of the Church of England. For them, the interpretation of the Bible came from using tradition and reason. Salvation, in their minds, came by faith alone. The Counter-Reformation, also called the Catholic Reformation, was a movement that involved the Catholic Church desperately trying to keep followers. Pope Paul III and Paul IV, along with Ignatius of Loyola, created a religious order called the Society of Jesus. The followers, called Jesuits, led the reform and went out into the world to teach about Catholicism, as well as get people to convert.
Thank you for watching, and tune in next week to learn about the oldest millionaire who still lives in his parents' basement.